Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome, welcome, welcome. This is our speaker series event for March, and I am Dr. Jean Del Coley, the Executive Director of the Center for Future Educators at the College of New Jersey. So the purpose of our speaker series is to provide future educators in New Jersey the opportunity to see the many facets of education, and we hope to provide a little bit of inspiration for you. We'll have the Q&A box available for later in the program, and this is a reminder that the program is being recorded and will be available on our Center for Future Educators website next week, so you can check with us and we should have that ready to go. It does take collaboration to make the CFE and its programming possible. The center is graciously funded by NJEA, and we are grateful that their support means we can bring you this programming and much, much more. So today's topic is educator activists, and I am very proud to introduce our guest for today, Mr. Sharif El-Mekki. So I'm going to let you know a little bit about his background. Sharif El-Mekki is the founder and CEO of the Center for Black Educator Development. The center exists to ensure there will be equity in the recruiting, training, hiring, and retention of quality educators that reflect the cultural backgrounds and share common socio-political interests of the students they serve. The center is developing a nationally relevant model to measurably increase teacher diversity and support Black educators through 4 pillars: professional learning, pipeline, policies, and pedagogy. So far, the center has developed ongoing and direct professional learning, mentoring, coaching, and other opportunities for Black teachers and other educators serving students of color. The center also carries forth the Freedom or Liberation School agenda by hosting Freedom School sites that incorporates research-based curricula and exposes high school and college students to the teaching profession to help fuel a pipeline of Black educators. And I'm sure Sharif's going to talk a little more about his summer program today. Prior to founding the center, Mr. El-Mekki served as a nationally recognized principal and U.S. Department of Education Principal Ambassador Fellow. His school, Mastery Charter Shoemaker, was recognized by President Obama and Oprah Winfrey and was awarded the prestigious EPIC Award for 3 consecutive years as being amongst the top 3 schools in the country for accelerating students' achievement levels. The Shoemaker campus was also recognized as one of the top 10 middle school and top 10 high schools in the state of Pennsylvania for accelerating the achievement levels of African-American students. In 2014, El-Mekki founded the Fellowship, Black Male Educators for Social Justice, an organization dedicated to recruiting, retaining, and developing Black male educators. Sharif also blogs on Philly's 7th Ward, is a member of the 8 Black Hands podcast, and serves on several boards and committees focused on educational and racial justice. And without further ado, I can't wait to hear this presentation. Sharif, take it away.
All right, thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here. I think anytime that we are in the presence of youth, it is a good day. So thanks again. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to apologize up front for moving quickly because you all have some fantastic questions that I really want to get into. So can you see the screen? Thumbs up? Okay, beautiful. Yep. All right. So your topic is around activism, and I'm so glad to be here today because that's exactly what attracted me to the profession of teaching. I was on my way to law school and I got detoured for the past 28 years. First becoming a teacher, then later on a principal, and now as a nonprofit that's adjacent to educational systems and schools. We had this saying that is what attracted me to teaching was Dr. Martin Ryder, who was a veteran teacher in Philadelphia, shared that, hey, you know what, El-Mekki, you want to be an activist. I know you want to go to law school, but teaching well is the purest form of activism. And that really stuck with me, like, oh, wow, like I can apply the activism in the sense of racial justice that I wanted to pursue and connect it to educational justice. And my friend Chris Stewart said, yeah, the second part of that sentence, if teaching well is the purest form of activism, then learning is justice. And so that they are always combined, the teaching that's happening, and if it's done well, if it's done with in a culturally responsive lens, if it's done with this idea of outcomes and respect and honor for those being served, And then the learning that happens is a form of justice. And James Baldwin, one of my favorite writers, speaks about, teaching Black children is a revolutionary act. And we just add, like, teaching them superbly, teaching them well is a revolutionary act. That's me teaching back in a long time ago, 92, 93. And that's one of my students, Terrence Williams, who eventually became a teacher. Did not know that. He was a fantastic student, a great hockey player, and later on learned that he was teaching elementary school students. So this whole idea of activism, I think, is really important. All right, so our center is really in the sense of, like, how do we liberate education from constraints from two sides, both from, as a student, how can it be liberating to have an education, but then also as educators, as practitioners, how do we liberate education from any of the confines? We started the Center for Black Educator Development a couple years ago when we were looking at really student outcomes. And what we saw was there's always been a long history of research that speaks about same-race teachers and the importance of it for marginalized communities, Black and Brown communities, and how important that was, and that representation in leading classrooms, leading schools, leading school boards, that there needed to be some reflection of the students, and we firmly believe in that. Pennsylvania, 94% of the teachers are white in Pennsylvania, despite having so many diverse cities across the Commonwealth. And what we recognize is that, we want to recruit Black and Brown teachers, but we want to provide professional development for all teachers because we believe that that's really important. And so while we talk about teacher diversity, educational inequities, we also know that there's a long history of Black teachers being successful with Black students. And how do we pull that pedagogy out? How do we pull that learning out and apply it to today for all teachers, so that there's more of a balance, but there are also greater student outcomes. So that's who we are as an organization. Many of you have probably already heard about this, longitudinal study, but there's research, as I mentioned before, that when Black children, for example, have Black teachers, they have a higher sense of belongingness. They're more likely to be looked at as gifted and talented and have more access to rigorous courses like AP or IB or honors. Attendance is better, grades are better, test scores are better. But then there was also research that shows longitudinal, and that these students would be more likely to graduate high school. And in places like Philadelphia, where only 60% of Black boys graduate high school in 4 years, when they enter ninth grade, only 60% of them graduate with their peers 4 years later. And that there's still a significantly, disparity between the graduation rates, that Black teachers can have an impact on that they're going to college, they're seeing themselves in college and so forth. It can be as high as, 29% more likely to consider college, and 39% less likely to drop out for some, groups of students. So this is a theory of change, but it's also based on the realities and lived experiences. And then overall, Pennsylvania, but obviously New Jersey and really across the country, there have been in certain aspects teacher shortages in particular areas. STEM is always short. Diverse teachers is always lower than what we'd like to see. But then there are also just overall teachers, whether there's to serve special ed students or special needs students or whatever, there's been a decrease. And you see in Pennsylvania, the decrease was stark. 71% between 09 and 17, from 14,000 teacher certificates to down to 4,000. So it is a tremendous issue that, particularly depending on the subject and the location, can be something that is, we should be treating it as a national emergency in certain situations. Here's just a graph of that same thing, and you can see where the teaching certification numbers were as far as enrollment, and then where it was in 1617. So this is a little dated, but we have not bounced back 100%, from 1617. And so one of the things that we've been speaking about, I'm really excited that you all have a group, because we believe it's kind of like the 3 E's. Early exposure to attract youth to at least consider teaching, helping them understand the connection between the activism and justice that teaching well can provide. So you have exposure. Experiences is the next one. Like, how do they experience education themselves as students? Can they envision themselves leading the classroom? Or are they totally turned off based on their personal experiences? But then also, what alternate experiences do they receive? Because everyone, most people go through school, but everyone doesn't always make the connection between their experience as students to teaching. And so what experiences do they get in order to teach? So many high school students that I meet, they tell me that they don't have an experience of teaching, but if they were interested in art or music or STEM, there's art museums that will say, hey, we have a program, come learn some of the finer points of painting or pottery, or, oh, you want to be a musician, come learn how to play the trombone. And like, there are very specific skills, discrete skills that people are learning about various interests. But if you want to become a teacher, where do you learn the skills, the art and science and mindset of effective teaching? For many folks, they're like, oh, you want to be a teacher? You like kids, come babysit mine, right? Like, that is the experience that they get. What we want to make sure is that students have a well-rounded opportunity to connect the dots between teaching and learning and teaching, and what they do every day as leaders. So when I see my high school students or middle school students who are displaying, even elementary school students who are displaying leadership, I always say, like, wow, you know what? That's what teachers do. Or if they're helping their peers with a math assignment, hey, you know what? Great job teaching, great job leading. And so students can start even envisioning themselves as, oh, you know what? I've been teaching for a while. Like, you know what? And most people have some person, most people who are interested in teaching have had some type of opportunity where they felt empowered to teach. They felt like they were leading someone. They felt that they were mentoring or helping with homework, whatever it was, that we help and expose and connect the dots. And so we have exposure, experience, and then elevation, right? And so this still talks about, elevating the career, and you don't have to wait till you become my age or become a professional to elevate the profession. You have, as youth, have agency to help elevate the profession now. Like, one, you are involved in thinking about teaching already. You're already engaging folks and thinking about this. But then you also want to challenge you to always look for ways, how can I learn about the art, science, and mindset of effective teachers? Here's just a short graph of folks who have gone to teacher colleges and how some of them do not feel prepared. And I would challenge all of us, including teacher colleges and so forth. Like, these are things that we should be aware of and ask as we're choosing our teacher prep programs, asking, how do you prepare? How do you know that your alumni are prepared to teach other people's children? Because it's not something that should be ignored. But unfortunately, many people enter the classroom because they did not have programs like yours. They were not with, Jean or Kimberly to learn about and be exposed and have those experiences. So back to our organization, we have 4 things that we're trying to really look at. One, what are the pathways to teaching? What are all the different ways people can start leading a classroom? What are the professional learning opportunities for everybody, whether it's a high school student or if it's a veteran educator who sits on the school board? What are all the different ways that we should always reflect, about our practices, and how it matches up with best practices and how it influences student outcomes. Then the pedagogy, how have Black teachers, brown teachers, how they've taught children is not often centered in teacher prep programs, right? Like, and so it's often from a Eurocentric view or a white American view. When you're talking about educational theorists, behavior theorists, child psychologists. But suppose we made that more inclusive of other people's perspective, particularly around marginalized children. And then the last one is around policy. How do we address policy issues? So we talked a little bit about this as far as the early on road. Now we'll talk about our Freedom Schools program, which is part of our experience. We'll talk about those exposure, experience, and elevation. So this is kind of the experience and elevation as well as exposure. I think it hits all three. And so it is basically a summer program where we invite diverse candidates, aspiring educators, Black and Brown high school and college students to come and teach. They practice teaching. They really focus on literacy and positive racial identity, how to support young Black and Brown first, second, and third graders read well, but also have a strong racial identity. And so we do that through this Freedom School Literacy Academy program. It's intergenerational, where it's a paid apprenticeship for high school and college students to work together and be coached by people on our staff as they're teaching first, second, and third graders. So last year we had to move, like everyone else around the world, to a virtual platform, but normally it is an in-person program. We spoke about this. This is the team. We see teaching as a political act, and when you combine the activism, the justice, which are student outcomes and their learning, and that all of this is a political act. And so I'm appreciative of you all for being a part of this work early on, and participating in the exposure, experience, and again, elevating the profession. It's not just for the professionals, it's also for the aspiring professionals. And your work reflects that. So thank you.
Thank you, Sharif. I was taking furious notes.
I'm sorry, I was going so quickly because I'm like, I really want to get into the discussion of hearing their thoughts and ideas.
There's so much good there and so much good work. And so I'm really excited to jump into our student questions. But fun fact, Sharif, I too was on a pre-law track and found myself in the dean's office, Dean Justine Hernandez Levine, and had like a come to moment. Education was my path because I said I wanted to be in politics and I wanted to make a change. I wanted to make a difference, and you can make no greater difference than from a classroom.
Yeah. I mean, Dr. Martin Ryder he did this graph. He said, hey, if you teach for 3 years, these are the number of folks that you're likely to impact. I was like, whoa, you know what I mean? It like blew me away. And then he said, it's not just the folks who are inside your classroom, but if you're a great teacher, you not only impact that student that's right in front of you, but their friends will hear about you. Their families will hear about you. The messages that you give, the lessons that you teach, they're sharing it with others. Like, well, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so showed me like this way, and they showed me that way. And then other people, there's like your sphere of influence becomes greater and greater the stronger you teach and the longer you teach. And I was just like, whoa, like I had not heard of any other way to have that level of impact on my community. And I just fell in love with this idea of, sharing and transmitting knowledge, but also being in an ecosystem where I was also learning and also being fulfilled. So
there's so much reciprocity in that process. And I find that when we introduce future educators or those who are interested in the profession, shaping it this way is incredibly valuable and the most authentic way to shape it.
Absolutely.
And I was really moved by what you said, teaching well is the purest form of activism. So we are going to start there, honor Dr. Martin Ryder. So one of the questions from our student ambassadors was, how do you, and we're going to get into the Sharif, the you,
okay.
how do you define activism?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And so a lot of times people think they only really, when they hear activism, the first thing they think about is protesting in the streets. And there's space for that. Like there's a long history of how that combined with other things creates change. So we think about the civil rights movement and other movements, youth-led movements, whether it's Soweto in apartheid South Africa, whether it's in Mexico, whether it's in the Americas, wherever it was, you could see that there were youth-led movements that had that form of activism. But activism means that you're active about something. And so how I define it is anytime that you're trying to make change and you are actively trying to address change. And it can come in all different forms. I think it takes different strategies, it takes different partnerships, it takes, where the movement can collide with a moment, right? And I think we are in that space right now, where a lot of times you hear the phrase like, it's a movement, not a moment. Well, it's actually usually when things change, it's actually both colliding, they're both coming together. There's a moment in time that we're in right now that is for us, right? A lot of times people are like, oh yeah, if I was in the civil rights movement, if I was this, I would, and I used to be one of those youth. I was like, I would have did this, I would have did that. Both my parents were in the Black Panther Party. And I used to tell them when I was a kid, oh, I should have been born back then so I could have been a Black Panther. And they were like, no, your time is coming. That wasn't your time. Your time is in the future. And it took me years to realize like, it is. This is my time. This is where my moment of maturity and realization is coming together with this movement, this demand and thirst for change. And so activism can be anything around it. Like Dr. Martin Luther King talked about, he has two quotes that I'll share with you. One I'm pretty sure you heard, where he says, the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. I'm butchering it, but it's, something about the moral arc, right? And activism means that you bring a hammer and you help bend it, that you're not waiting passively for it to bend and like, yeah, it's going to change going to happen. Well, yeah, it's coming. I know it's coming. My mother used to say, when you're on a boat in the middle of nowhere, pray and row at the same time. Don't just sit there praying, right? And that's the same type of concept. Bring your hammer and bend that moral arc. The other thing Dr. King said that may be less widely known, someone asked him like, hey, how do you change the world? He said, you want to change the world? Pick up a pen and write. So if you can pick up a pen, if Dr. King is saying like, if you can write, if you can share your thoughts and speak out against injustice with a pen or through action, like that it is. Today, it may be blogging, it may be, a podcast, it's teaching, right? Like, so every time, teachers are always picking up pens to write their lesson plans, to give feedback to writing, to design unit maps. So it is again, purest form of activism.
I was, as you said that, I was thinking of you, and I read a few of your blogs in advance of this call for the Association for Supervision and Curriculum. So I have a few questions about those, but I want to just revisit this idea of activism. So how would you differentiate for our listeners the difference between activism and advocacy, and their intertwined roles or separate spaces?
Yeah. It is. And sometimes, depending on how people are looking at it, right? And so sometimes advocacy is from afar. Like it doesn't have to impact you as much, right? Like I can advocate for someone even if I'm not close in proximity to their lived experience, right? But I can advocate, I can speak on their behalf, right? It's one thing to advocate for someone because you can do that from afar. You don't have to take up risk, right? And it's important. I'm not trying to, belittle it, but the activism is more active, so to speak. It is, you are going through the door with them. You may even be leading it as a fullback, right? Like, here's a small example. So I was at an organizing meeting one time and it was about police brutality. And there was a mixed group of folks, and there was a white woman who said, hey, you know what? I recognize that Black people have not only been subjected to police brutality, for years, they've also had to stand up and protest against it and been the ones to have been arrested and things like that. So she could have written a blog and advocated for a change. What she said was, I am going to be in the front line with you all's permission so that we know that they're likely to be arrested. I am going to put myself in that position, for this civil disobedience, and I'm going to take the lead. I'm not going to be way behind you. I am going to actually step in, right? But I'm taking a risk, in conjunction and concerted effort with you. Not trying to take it over, right? Still being humble, having that cultural humility to ask questions, be creative, and say, would this be useful to the movement, right? And the Black women say, yeah, you know what? Like, usually if we get arrested, sometimes we lose our jobs, right? We may be struggling with poverty. We may be struggling with other things. We may have hourly jobs. And this woman said, yeah, I have privilege. Like I'm not going to lose my job. I'll be fine. Da, 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 right. And like thinking about that can be the difference between taking an active role in something or being an advocate, right? And doesn't mean that advocacy isn't important, right? An activist is automatically an advocate, but all advocates are not necessarily activists.
I think that's a great distinction between the two for folks. And I think the word that kept standing out to me as you were describing activism versus advocacy, but that word with and standing with, of asking permission, I think that's just really important to understand the full objectives of the work. And so, and something you also said was, the lived experiences, like understanding the lived experiences. So indulge me, but we would love to learn about some of your lived experiences. I got to go there as moderators, my responsibility to go there. So you talked a little bit about how Dr. Ryder had, inspired you and, with this idea of this being the purest form of activism. But what really prompted you and how did you know you were in the right place? Yeah. Like how did you made that change, but how do you know it was right?
Yeah. So I'll start with that question and then I'll go backwards. Right. So the day I realized I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing was when someone told me. I was working in a school. I was working at Turner Middle School in Southwest Philadelphia. I was an 8th grade literature and social studies teacher. I went there like, I want to teach math and science. They're like, the vacancy we have is literature and history. I'm like, great. All right, let's go. Like I was just so excited to, be a part of a school community. But then later getting to know the staff, and I just fell in love with it right from the beginning. Originally, I was still going to just do it for a couple of years and then go to law school. But I was just like, oh no, I'm not. I literally thought I was going to be at my first school for 30, 35 years. I was just like, oh, I could do this forever. This is amazing, right? But in 26 years, I ended up, being in 3 schools. But at some point during the first year, people found out I had to go to court because I had been shot a couple of years earlier. And someone mentioned, and the name of the young man who shot me, I had just graduated from college. I graduated in May. I was shot playing football, of all things, in Southwest Philadelphia, on a football field. And they were like, oh, that name, the guy who shot you, he actually went to this school. And it just struck me like, wait a minute. The kid who shot me, who really changed how I was thinking about contributing and supporting my community, was literally by the person who shot me, who I ended up teaching in the very school he had dropped out of. Right. So I was 20 when I was, shot, and he was 19. So here I was with a college degree, and he was last grade he had finished was 7th grade. That's when I knew, like, I was like, oh, you know what? Nothing is by coincidence. Like I am supposed to be doing this work, right? Like that's when it really struck. I also had, other interaction with students, the response, their growth. I was just like, oh, maybe this is it. Before that, so I'll just go backwards a little bit. As I said, I was on my way to law school when I when I was shot. I was in the hospital, and I remember thinking like, maybe law. And when I was thinking about law, I was thinking very specifically about police brutality. I was thinking about like, oh, maybe I'll get into internal affairs and the police force, investigate rogue cops, or maybe I'll be a lawyer. Like I was thinking about all of that. Then I was like, I want to work with youth like Derek, the young man who shot me. Like that's what I actually want to do. And so initially I ended up at a center called the Youth Study Center. Now it's called Juvenile Justice Center. And it's for children waiting to be adjudicated. And they were hiring for counselors. I was like, I'll go there, right? Like, that's what I'll do. On my way to law school, I'm like, that's what I'll do for a couple of years. I'll commit to supporting youth who, maybe have easy access to guns. Maybe they were, and at that time, I didn't know he had dropped out or anything. It was just like, like whatever it is, that anger or rage or whatever, caused them to be in these type of situations. So I got hired, and I did not make it through orientation. I was so depressed. I was like, oh my gosh, like, and they need great people, but I was like, this is a kiddie jail. This is not the right Jim Collins talks about being on the right seat on the right bus. And so I think I was generally on the right space. I was thinking about kids and youth and contributing, but I was definitely on the wrong bus, let alone the wrong seat. I was just like, I didn't want to be in a place where 12-year-olds, we had to do suicide watches with 12-year-olds. I was like, where are they before they get here? So right while I was struggling with that, someone called me and said, hey, you know what, Sharif, I heard they're recruiting teachers, Black men to become teachers. And I was like, Mama Cynthia, it was the woman who called me. I was like, I don't want to be a teacher. Like, what made, in my head, she was an elder, so I was respectful about it, but I was just like, what in the world made her think I wanted to be a teacher? I had never, it never came out of these two lips. But she was an elder, so I did go to the informational meeting. And that's where I met Dr. Ryder. And his understanding of how educational and racial justice is combined was really intriguing. But so you see like that stark moment where it's like the skies open up and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, to all the reflections of past times of my parents saying, no, how you impact the community will be coming, it'll be made clear to you. But even going through a really traumatic experience, but still having kind of the mindset like, all right, how do I use this to still support communities and youth that, some people may have looked at like, oh, I want them to go to jail forever. I don't want anything to do with youth or whatever. But I didn't feel that way. And I think a lot of it had to do with my own experience in school, and how it was a fulfilling experience, I'm still in touch with my elementary school principal. Like,
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So, and teachers and stuff. So
actually, I'm the same way. I'm still like Facebook. Actually, just this morning I was Facebooking with my drama director.
Yeah.
Posting on my mom's page for her birthday. Anyway,
those relationships are real. They're deep. And when they say like, a teacher's influence is forever, it literally can be forever, because I, as a principal, I would have what I call grand students. The children of people I taught were now in my school where I was the principal of. And I was just like, oh my gosh, because it's one thing like, oh, that student saying like, hey, you were a great teacher for me. But then also say like, I believe in you so much. And this was they weren't zoned to the school. They could have gone anywhere. And they said, no, I remember the experience I had with you when you were my teacher. I want my child to experience teachers that you've hired and your leadership as a principal. Like, there was nothing more like, it was just an outstanding. I get chills when I think about it now, but I've had so many grand students over the years that it was just always just really caused me to be humble and reflective, and also emboldened to keep going and doing more. That
makes you realize is that your influence is infinite.
Yeah. We talk about the education a child gets influences the trajectory of their grandchildren.
Yeah.
Right. So as you're teaching, you're actually influencing their grandchildren's lives, right? Because of what they'll be able to do, and then what their grandchildren will be able to do. So that's how I look at teaching, and that purest form of activism. And it is humbling. I'm
going to carry that with me. That is so, I think everyone on this call, I think, will carry that with them in terms of teaching is the purest form of activism. And when I think about being active, I mean, if anything, you just shared with us how you really turned your trauma into triumph. And I don't need to, but I applaud you and I admire you for that. And I know the feeling of experiencing trauma and turning it around to benefit others.
Yeah.
And I think everyone can empathize with having that connection to a space and giving back to it.
Yeah. And so many people do it, and I think it was, when we can connect the dots between that and education and teaching and learning, and what it means, and the experiences that I had, again, at elementary school, middle school, high school. It wasn't that I crossed teaching off the list. It never made it on the list. It was just not even something I thought about. But it still was able to draw from that. And then the other aspect of activism I think is so important is really our mindsets, right? Like, that's the first place that we are active about, is our mindsets about people, children, and the communities that send them to us.
Sharif, did you just see me raise my hand?
I did. I was about to laugh.
I raised my hand in faculty meetings because I had an idea. I was so excited.
Yeah.
As you said mindset, it also just hit me like how much courage it takes to not only change the trajectory of your own life, but to change the trajectory of others. But also it takes courage to be an activist. And one of the questions from the students was, you know, what would you tell people who are too afraid to make a change or to go from advocate to activist?
Yeah. You know, I would say one, acknowledge that, wrestle. First thing to wrestle with is always our mindset, like reflect. Because sometimes people are afraid or nervous of things, but you really want to challenge them. And sometimes it helps with a process it with a friend, a loved one, an elder, mentor. Sometimes it's helpful to write about it, right? But usually the first thing I ask is like, what is your experience with it? Right. And so, like, what is your experience with activism? Like, why do you think you're nervous? What are you afraid that may come out? Right. And so sometimes you have to get that piece out. Right. Like, and sometimes it's easy. People know. Sometimes they don't know. They actually have to think, like, why? Well, why? And, they say sometimes when you want to get to the root cause or the root analysis of something, ask why 7 times. That your first response probably is not the response. Like, you can go deeper. And so, like, why? Well, I'm afraid. Why? Well, because something bad might happen. Well, why are you afraid of that? Why are you know what I mean? And just keep asking yourself, or with a loved one, have them keep asking. So you kind of get to the cause. Was it that one time, maybe you'll unpeel that once you thought you were being an activist, you had a really bad experience, right? And maybe it was never really processed. Maybe you have this thought like, you know what, it doesn't change anything. And you haven't really reflected on what message did you get about activism that doesn't change anything, and how can you look at it differently, right? And then the other part I would say, so one is just this deep reflection, right? Like our mindset and really looking at what have I internalized about things? What am I nervous about the outcomes or the inputs or the outcomes? Like, what drives that? And the other one is, am I alone? And I think any system that we're trying to change wants you to think that you're alone. That is the easiest way to maintain the status quo. And so, really doing a deeper reflection and looking around and asking, who else is out there doing this work? You are never alone. No matter what the issue is that you want to address, you are never alone. And don't allow anyone to make you think you're alone. Your tribe, your village, your community is out there. It may be virtual, it may be next door, it may be in your own house, but you have a group of committed folks who are also working on that. And just imagine if you combine forces.
When I heard you say that, I just thought even just being on this call is such evidence of we're never alone. Like there's so much in that in terms of like we are a part of communities beyond our own imagination, which I think is really important.
Yeah. I mean, and that's one thing that the pandemic probably showed us, not that this is the way we wanted to learn that. But, my mother recently passed away, and I can tell you that across 5 continents, people reached out to us and said, hey, we had a prayer vigil. We had a meeting about your mother. We had a prayer circle. 5 continents like that. It had never, like, I knew like she had been here. We grew up there, that kind of thing. But 5 continents, communities of people saying like, and that wasn't part of her, our daily conversation or anything, but there was something, right? And so I mean, she had people out there who believed in what she believed in, who appreciated what her activist efforts were, and so we're never alone.
If you don't mind me asking, to honor, well, what was your mother's name?
Oh, Aisha El-Mekki.
Yeah. I want to honor Aisha. So, you here now. What was her greatest gift to you as an activist?
Yeah, I think her greatest gift, I think 2 things. One, her humility about it. She was not the type of activist that needed to, be up front. She didn't feel like she needed to lead, but she definitely believed in the power of collaboration, community building. The other one, so I'll give you 3. The other one is her passion for children. So this is a woman who, even before, she's like, well, I don't know if I'll teach in schools yet, but I want to get a degree in education so I could teach my own children well. Like, I want to know some of the art and science of teaching, because I want it for my own children, my own, my nephews and nieces and grandchildren. Like, that was her original thing. Like, that's what she wanted. And then I think the other sense was just her commitment, to justice. I mean, this is a a woman who is a 16-year-old. I'll give you a little story, or just give you an example. It's a 16-year-old. She was going home one day, and this was before SEPTA. The bus company was called something else. So she was waiting for the bus, and her transfer expired. And so she gets on the bus and she presents it to the driver, and the driver's like, "You have to get off." She's like, "It's dark, it's night, I got to get home." It's like, "No, that expired. You can't ride." Like, just imagine, like, telling the child, "You can't get on this bus. I am not going to help you get home because your piece of paper expired." And she was like, "Well, you all are behind schedule. Like, I'm actually, I've been waiting, so whatever the case is." So she sat down on the bus. She's like, "I got to get home." The bus driver calls the police. Yeah. So we talk about like these incidents that happen now. This happened way back when, she was born in the 40s. So the police come. They tell the other passengers to get off the bus and told the bus driver, drive the bus to the nearest police station. Now, mind you, this is a 16-year-old. They empty. Imagine it you're just like elder trying to get home. And the police like, "No, get off the bus." This person has confronted, the issue in such a way that we have to drive her to the police station, and she's 16 and she's trying to get home. So we're going to inconvenience all of you, make you all get off the bus, wait for the next one. And the bus driver drove her to the police station. And then she remembers 5 or 6 police officers coming in and dragging her off the bus and into the police station. So her aunt Vernice, whose daughter is now a teacher, Jerry Watley, her mother, Jerry's mother, my mother's aunt, picked her up from the police station, right? But she stayed committed to justice, her sense of justice and children, and combined that, right? And she used to say, like, "You know what? You want peace, fight for justice, because justice will give birth to peace, and schools and classrooms are ground zero for all of this to happen." So it still ties back to what Dr. Wright, right? So these are things that she was already planting in me, even though I did. And she was a teacher, and mind you, but we never talked to her. She's like, and I asked her later, she's like, "I just didn't think you wanted to be, I didn't think that interested you. I knew you were interested in activism and social justice and racial justice, but I just, didn't have a conversation with you about teaching." But she was always obviously planting seeds around activism and justice and rights for children. And then sometimes you need, as a child growing up, I see this with my own children, sometimes there has to be other people to say the same thing, but with a different tone, a different words. And then later you're like, "Oh, that's what my parents were saying all along,"
My parents said they knew my whole life that I would be a teacher, but it took sitting down with my dean.
Yeah. They like,
It
it's funny how it happens, but that's why you need a village. That's why you need a community, right? Because it's not always going to be, straight from your parents' mouths to your ears and to your heart and brain. Sometimes they're just planting seeds. Someone else waters it. Someone else fertilizes, right? Like your experiences fertilize it. There's someone else out there, your dean, Dr. Ryder, other people, maybe even a peer, that actually starts watering it in a way that seed that was planted long, long ago starts really sprouting and taking root. So this is why I believe, like, I've never learned not being in community. Like, I've always been in community with others as some of my best experiences. And I think that's what part of what great teaching can foster.
Well, you've shared a lot about some like the great experiences of being part of community and honoring your mother's commitment. But students are wondering if there was ever a time that like your commitment wavered, or you had felt that, it was too hard, or considered giving up due to forces larger than yourself, or were met with negative response. How did you combat those challenges?
Yeah, I think I definitely tapped into some of my parents' determination. What some people call stubbornness, other people call determination, right? So some of it is that. I have a friend who said something about, like, "Yeah, I quit at the end of each day. I just show back up the next day, like every day, like I'm never going back." But in the morning, wake up, can't wait to get back, right? Because it's, teaching, and I tell people all the time, and if you haven't taught a class, and everybody's taught in different ways, but to actually think about how it's all connected what happened yesterday? How does it connect tomorrow? What are the standards you're driving for? What are the personalities that you're trying to mesh to build community? How do you get outcomes, hold high expectations? There's so much going on. There's studies about, the number of decisions that teachers make every hour, let alone all day. And it's like, it's hard for people to kind of wrap their minds around, like, there's no real downtime. When you're teaching, you are on, you're on, you're on. When you're walking down the hallway, you are on, because you are always modeling. You're modeling when you're like intellectuals doing deeply emotional work as a teacher. So it can be frustrating, just like it can be rewarding. And so I think when I think about the times that I was discouraged, it was usually like some of my own failing, right? Like if there was a student that I could not quite connect with the way that I wanted to, or if I knew, like, you know what, my students didn't perform as well. And I knew it was something that I'm like, you know what, I probably missed the mark, or sometimes I just felt guilty, right? Like the guilt, like fourth period, I taught something first, second period, wasn't quite. Fourth period, I tweaked it. I got that feedback. I tweaked it for four, and fourth and fifth period were amazing. And I was just like, oh, I feel bad about first period class. Like, you know what I mean? That's how I felt like about my first year tour teaching. Like, whoa, I feel sorry for y'all. You know what I mean? Like I've learned, I see how much I grew. But some of them are the ones that I'm still in touch with, right? Like the year one, and said, no, you made this impact. I'm like, yeah, but I could have done even more had I known more, right? Like, you know better, you do better.
That was one of the questions from students was, have you had students that inspired your activism or have been inspired by your activism? I know you talked about Terrence Williams, but
yeah, you know what? I was in West Philly, earlier this year. It was still in the pandemic, so some point this year, and I dropped my car off, and some kid comes, grown man, I'm calling him kid. A grown man comes, knocks on my window. I'm like, he looks vaguely familiar, and I'm like, hey, how you doing? He's like, El-Mekki? I was like, yeah. And then he lowers his mask, and I see it is Russell Stanton. And so he said, you know what, man, let me tell you, I was talking about you the other day. Mind you, he's a grown man. Like, I'm almost 50. I started teaching when I was 21, right? Like, so, and he was 14, right? So he's in his late 30s. Talking about, yeah, I was talking about my 8th grade teacher the other day, right? Like, and I was just like, why, And but I you get that so much, and I think it just it inspires, and again, it emboldens you to continue the work. But he told me something that, and I used it, but I forget, like sometimes you use certain sayings and lessons, but you don't remember that I taught them that. Like it was just part of living, being in community. He said, I still tell my kids to this day, thinking comes from not knowing. Because as I was teaching, sometimes I really want to push them for their agency, to be confident. If you've done the work, if you study, speak with confidence. Don't let people cower you. So sometimes they would give an answer, and it wasn't this, but if it was like 1 + 1 is 2, and I'm like, it's 2? Is it really? And just because I wasn't like, yeah, it is, right? But I wanted them to have that. Like, if you got to go back to your notes, people are always going to challenge you. So what are you going to do to reflect, reinforce, and come back, right? And so it was that kind of thing. And they'd be like, I think and I'm like, thinking comes from not knowing. Like, go study it more and come back knowing, right? Like, and it doesn't mean that you're being arrogant about it, but there's certain things like, no, I did my homework. I know, I actually know what I'm talking about. Like, you have a voice, right? One of my favorite quotes is Dr. Roy, where she says, there's no such thing as the voiceless, only the preferably unheard and the deliberately silenced. And so I would, and I'm like, man, I wish I knew that quote when one of my first couple of years of teaching. But that's what I was pretty much saying. Like, you're not voiceless. Like, don't let people convince you to. And then we had students who inspired me in their own activism. So we had a group of students that called themselves Raised Woke. It was a student-led group, and they would invite adults to come in and speak, but they're like, all right, now bye, this is our thing, right? And I just always loved seeing that, seeing them. And I've just always seen it. I had a cousin, when I graduated from high school, there was a particular teacher that was problematic. And I just remember, I would challenge them. And he just ended up giving me a D. And I didn't fight. I was just like, whatever. It was English, and I'm just like, you can't convince me I got a D in English, right? Like, I know this is centered on conversations we would have, but he was known to be like really racially insensitive, even racist. And my cousin, so I graduated, I was in college, and my cousins, one of the Schultz children actually helped participate in a walkout. They ended up walking out because there was a pattern of this type of behavior. And so I was in college, they were still in high school. I was like, you know what, that's another level of activism that I could have taken, that I could have been more. I just took it and suffered again, thought like, right. But then they realized we're not alone. There's a pattern of this. There are a lot of us that's suffering from this. So we're going to in unison organize and make sure that our voices are heard. Right. And so they ended up in a paper. And the district then acted and removed this teacher, listened to all the grievances, found evidence that this was going on, right? And so, whether it's, my cousins, the Schultzes, whether it was the raised woke children, youth who are, some of them are like, oh yeah, we're going to become educators. Some of them are actually teachers now. Awesome. And they were in raised woke as high school students in this student-led group. And we didn't have an organization like you all's where it was like, oh, this is to, for folks who are interested in teaching. It was more or less just around activism. Guess what? Some of them are right now teaching today. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Or it's Russell, right? That was his name, knocking on your window.
Yeah.
Those students too, right? It's a whole range of inspiration. I have two more questions for you, and then we'll hand the program back over to Jeannie, even though I don't want to, and I just want to keep talking. but you were talking about the teacher who was removed, but also a lot of the work that you are in is about Black Educator Development. And the Center for Black Educator Development just announced a $3 million initiative focusing on Black educator recruitment and support. And so I'd love for you to tell our audience more about that $3 million initiative and the goal for the next 12 years and how this will make a difference.
No, thank you for that. So this initiative is really around building a Black teacher pipeline and really connecting all the dots and making it some people term the pipeline in teaching as a leaky pipeline. We want to build a nurturing, supportive, sustainable, and effective pipeline of Black teachers. And how we believe you do this is combining all the different joints. And we believe it's at least a 12-year process when you're thinking about a pipeline. It starts in high school, freshman in high school. That's why for our freedom schools, you can be a freshman in high school and work with us because that's part of the pipeline. And that, with this idea that Mary Church Terrell used to talk about is lift as we climb. So you can be a ninth grader, you can climb and you can lift up a first grader through teaching, through mentoring, through support, right? And so we're codifying it and combining programming, linking. It's almost like Legos, putting them all together. One of my favorite hobbies as a child, right? And so
I love Legos.
Yeah, to me, it's the best thing. We always did the space ones. Like that's what we wanted. We wanted all
Star Wars in my family.
Yeah, see, And so this whole idea of high school and then college, intergenerational model. So you go from high school, then you get into college. And what we're doing is we're raising funds. The $3 million is just a start to get us in the starting blocks. But part of so it's a paid apprenticeship while you're in high school, is dual enrollment where you get college credit as well as high school credit for taking a course that's related to education. Then you're able to go to either a 2-year school and get an associate's degree in education or go right to a 4-year school, continue to work in a paid apprenticeship where you're now mentoring and supporting high school students as well as the elementary school students while you're being mentored by others. And so it's last dollar scholarships are being raised as well, right? And so you take financial literacy courses, other type of courses where you're constantly growing in this space. You're having a clinical experience, exposure, elevation. And then your first 4 years of teaching. So it's not just like, oh, all right, you finished college, see you later. It's like, we're going to support you just like any other profession. You have an apprenticeship, you have, think of it as whether it's a residency in the medical field or apprentice architect, like there's always an intergenerational model. But often in teaching, it's kind of like, oh yeah, you know what, just go right in where, and teaching is one of the few professions where you have to kind of be an expert from the day one, right there, because you have someone else's child in front of you. right? And that's not fair if you're not prepared well. That's not fair if you don't have an ecosystem of support around you. And so we believe the first 4 years are crucial in doing that. And so what we're raising money for as part of this initiative is Black teachers who stay, we would give a retention bonus. So if they're continuing to move around, so they got their paid apprenticeships, high school, college, they got some scholarship money and paid apprenticeship. And then the first 4 years of teaching, after each year, you would get a bonus, a retention bonus. You finish year one, all right, you get $2,000. You finish year four, you get $8,000, right? Because it was showing, also demonstrating the importance of it. So overall, it's like kind of this $50,000 investment per person, which is expensive, but it's not expensive when you think about the needs
the return and the return.
Yeah, the return. And again, it's not just the children in front of them, it's their grandchildren.
Yeah, exactly. It's that that infinite influence. Like I'm so in awe of the 444 strategy, and the goal of turning around, I believe it's 21,000 Black educators.
Yes.
Correct. Yep. I'm excited to see this work happen. I know it was just announced. And I suppose the final question I have on the heels of that is, what do you hope? And the students want to know this too. This is their question. What do you want your legacy to be, Sharif El-Mekki?
Wow.
That wasn't me. I'm not asking the hard questions. That's
yeah. That's a very tough one, because when you're in the work, you're not really thinking about legacy and stuff like that, but I do think, I think about how, Russell remembered me, or how I remember my mother, or I remember my favorite teacher, Baba Changa, or Sister Ambra, when I think about those, if I just have a fraction of, being remembered, compared to what they are, they've been remembered, how they are remembered today. And I would say one, hopefully that I, had a love for humanity, and that I had a commitment to justice. And so if I'm even remembered in passing thoughts around those two weighty things, I would have won. Like I would have lived this life and won. So.
Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you.
I am so honored to have had this space and share it with you. And we still have a few more questions remaining, but I'm going to hand it over to our fearless leader to guide us through.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the work that you're doing. And really grateful, for all your work and your master facilitation of this conversation.
Kimberly is fantastic. Our
really
2020
is.
New Jersey State Teacher of the Year. So
absolutely, and congratulations on that too. That's a hell of a platform.
Would like to show my Center for Black Educator Development T-shirt.
Yes.
Supporting the cause.
I was just looking at the pictures. I screenshot the pictures the other day, and I meant to text them out. So thank you for your support.
Yeah, front and back, just in case they didn't see it the first time.
You missed it, coming and going,
There you go. And I'm also going to leave in the chat our CFE mailbox. If you want to send us a message, we can certainly get back to you and make any connections that we need to make here. But before we leave, Sharif, we have our standard common questions that we ask every person that comes on this program. And they're kind of fun. They're rapid fire. They don't require you to think too deeply. So go with your gut instinct on these, okay?
We got it.
All right. So first, what is your favorite word?
Oh, my favorite word is justice, actually. Like to me, that's everything.
What is your least favorite word?
No. I hate hearing that.
Always a way around it, right? If you could have any superhero power, what would it be?
I want to fly. I want to fly.
Okay. What was your favorite subject when you were at school?
I loved science. I love science. When you ask my elementary school teachers what if they would have guessed, they thought I would have done something with animals. Some of them would say, "Oh, you want to be a veterinarian?" And when I got older, I'm like, I actually don't want to neuter cats and dogs. I actually, but I've had an alligator. I have a corn snake now. We have chickens.
I was gonna say, I know I have a snake.
Yeah, so I've always had I do love nature and wildlife and things like that. So science, I would say.
Cool. If you were if you were a teacher right now, what grade or subject level do you wish you taught?
Oh, I wish I taught 10th or 11th grade literature or history. Yeah, that would be. I taught 8th grade literature and history, and I loved it.
Social
But then
studies. Yes.
being a principal in high school and being able to be part of those conversations, I always like, what books will we read next year? And I would read the books even as a principal, just like so I could, and like 4 sets, right? Like exactly.
Yep.
I'm just running around like, and so when I'm in the cafeteria, I'm like, hey, what do you think about so and so? Like I loved engaging in that, and so it would be literature, history in high school.
Okay.
Although shout out to 8th grade because I love that.
And on the flip side of that, what subject or grade level would you not want to teach?
Let me tell you something. When I thought about teaching, what I did was I was like, you know what? I'll substitute teach. I'll do that just to get experience. And they kept putting me in kindergarten and first grade classrooms. And God bless elementary school teachers. I mean, they are like superheroes, like none other. Like talking about like a super flying and maybe being able to lead 25 first graders. Like to me, that is a superhero strength that I do not have. That is, they are so talented, so amazing, so patient. I mean, I told my mother, I was like, you know what? I don't think I can teach. She's like, something is different. And I think you'd be better with older children. So, and she was right. Cause I was like, how do people do this?
Mm-hmm. It is exhausting.
Oh my gosh. Like
little classrooms.
I couldn't even wrap my brain around like, how do people do this? Like 30 years, they're still like, I'm like, I think, yeah.
It takes an act of Congress to get them from the rugs to the chairs and back. It's just incredible. I don't know how they have the patience for it. All right, next one. What sound or noise do you love?
I love birds chirping in the morning, like, and it's been increased with the weather change. Like, I love the sound of birds. Yeah.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Oh my gosh. The sound that folks make when they're tying rubber balloons up, like that squeak, or styrofoam. Like I don't get the same thing with chalk on the black. Like I don't know, nobody in the audience knows what blackboards and chalk is, but it used to be that kind of sound. That didn't bother me, but like that balloon and styrofoam, like that is it. Like I'm getting chills, like more like
right, next question. If someone were to play you in a movie version of your life, who would you want it to be?
Who would I want it to be? There's so many like great actors out there. I don't know. I'll go with default with like a Denzel, or you know what, a Denzel or a Will Smith. Like we went to the same high school, so shout out to Will Smith.
There you go, Philly connection. Yep. Yeah. All right. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
One day I was thinking about like, what would it be like to be a park ranger in Montana, just in the mountains, just like, looking at the wildlife, giving people help, but trying not to give too many people help because I kind of want to be by myself and see things for my own. Like they're like, we haven't seen the park ranger. Yeah, he's out by the lake,
appreciating nature.
Yeah.
And then final question, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You did well. Thank you for your work with my creation.
And thank you, Sharif, because this has been a most memorable event. I am so excited. There were points in this interview today where I was cheering in the background. Hands were up. Yes, totally. So thank you so much for being an inspiration for our students, for the work that you are doing. And if there is ever a way where we can not only advocate, but also be activists right alongside you, if we can provide that support and come with you, then we would be more than happy to do so. So thank you very much for being here today.
No, thank you for having me. Thanks for all the work that you are doing with our youth, and our future generation of educator activists. So thank you both. Kimberly, this was a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work. I put our website in the chat. And please share our podcast as well as blog page. We're always looking for student voice. So we would love to continue discussions around that.
Yeah, we'll add those resources to our CFE webpage so that they're accessible for everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.